The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Chapter 1. Little Miss Mary. Nobody seemed to care about Mary. She was born in India, where her father was a British official. He was busy with his work, and her mother, who was very beautiful, spent all her time going to parties. So an Indian woman, Kamala, was paid to take care of the little girl. Mary was not a pretty child. She had a thin, angry face and thin yellow hair. She was always giving orders to Kamala, who had to obey. Mary never thought of other people, but only of herself. In fact, she was a very selfish, disagreeable, bad-tempered little girl. One very hot morning, when she was about 9 years old, she woke up and saw that instead of Kamala, there was a different Indian servant by her bed. "What are you doing here?" she asked crossly. "Go away, and send Kamala to me at once." The woman looked afraid. "I'm sorry, Miss Mary. She can't come." Something strange was happening that day. Some of the house servants were missing, and everybody looked frightened. But nobody told Mary anything. And Kamala still did not come. So at last, Mary went out into the garden and played by herself under a tree. She pretended she was making her own flower garden and picked large red flowers to push into the ground. All the time, she was saying crossly to herself, "I hate Kamala. I'll hit her when she comes back." Just then, she saw her mother coming into the garden with a young Englishman. They did not notice the child, who listened to their conversation. "It's very bad, is it?" her mother asked the young man in a worried voice. "Very bad," he answered seriously. "People are dying like flies. It's dangerous to stay in this town. You should go to the hills, where there's no disease." "Oh, I know," she cried. "We must leave soon." Suddenly, they heard loud cries coming from the servants' rooms at the side of the house. "What's happened?" cried Mary's mother wildly. "I think one of your servants has just died. You didn't tell me the disease is here, in your house." "I didn't know!" she screamed. "Quick, come with me!" And together they ran into the house. Now Mary understood what was wrong. The terrible disease had already killed many people in the town, and in all the houses people were dying. In Mary's house, it was Kamala who had just died. Later that day, 3 more servants died there. All through the night and the next day, people ran in and out of the house, shouting and crying. Nobody thought of Mary. She hid in her bedroom, frightened by the strange and terrible sounds that she heard around her. Sometimes she cried, and sometimes she slept. When she woke the next day, the house was silent. Perhaps the disease has gone, she thought, and everybody is well again. I wonder who will take care of me instead of Kamala. Why doesn't someone bring me some food? It's strange the house is so quiet. But just then, she heard men's voices in the hall. "How sad," said one. "That beautiful woman." "There was a child, too, wasn't there?" said the other. "Although none of us ever saw her." Mary was standing in the middle of her room when they opened the door a few minutes later. The two men jumped back in surprise. "My name is Mary Lennox," she said crossly. "I was asleep when everyone was ill, and now I'm hungry." "It's the child, the one nobody ever saw," said the older man to the other. "They've all forgotten her." "Why was I forgotten?" asked Mary angrily. "Why has nobody come to take care of me?" The younger man looked at her very sadly. "Poor child," he said. "You see, there's nobody left alive in the house, so nobody can come." In this strange and sudden way, Mary learnt that both her mother and her father had died. The few servants who had not died had run away in the night. No one had remembered little Miss Mary. She was all alone. Because she had never known her parents well, she did not miss them at all. She only thought of herself, as she had always done. "Where will I live?" she wondered. "I hope I'll stay with people who let me do what I want." At first, she was taken to an English family who had known her parents. She hated their untidy house and noisy children, and preferred playing by herself in the garden. One day, she was playing her favorite game, pretending to make a garden, when one of the children, Basil, offered to help. "Go away!" cried Mary. "I don't want your help." For a moment, Basil looked angry, and then he began to laugh. He danced round and round Mary and sang a funny little song about Miss Mary and her stupid flowers. This made Mary very cross indeed. No one had ever laughed at her so unkindly. "You're going home soon," said Basil, "and we're all very pleased you're leaving." "I'm pleased too," replied Mary. "But where's home?" "You're stupid if you don't know that," laughed Basil. "England, of course. You're going to live with your uncle, Mr. Archibald Craven." "I've never heard of him," said Mary coldly. "But I know about him because I heard Father and Mother talking," said Basil. "He lives in a big, lonely old house and has no friends because he's so bad-tempered. He's got a crooked back and he's horrid." "I don't believe you," cried Mary. But the next day, Basil's parents explained that she was going to live with her uncle in Yorkshire, in the north of England. Mary looked bored and cross and said nothing. After the long sea journey, she was met in London by Mr. Craven's housekeeper, Mrs. Medlock. Together, they travelled north by train. Mrs. Medlock was a large woman with a very red face and bright black eyes. Mary did not like her, but that was not surprising, because she did not usually like people. Mrs. Medlock did not like Mary either. "What a disagreeable child," thought the housekeeper. "But perhaps I should talk to her. I can tell you a bit about your uncle, if you like," she said aloud. "He lives in a big old house, a long way from anywhere. There are nearly 100 rooms, but most of them are shut and locked. There's a big park round the house, and all kinds of gardens. Well, what do you think of that?" "Nothing," replied Mary. "It doesn't matter to me." Mrs. Medlock laughed. "You're a hard little girl. Well, if you don't care, Mr. Craven doesn't either. He never spends time on anyone. He's got a crooked back, you see, and although he's always been rich, he was never really happy until he married." "Married?" repeated Mary in surprise. "Yes. He married a sweet, pretty girl, and he loved her deeply. So, when she died—" "Oh, did she die?" asked Mary, interested. "Yes, she did. And now he doesn't care about anybody. If he's at home, he stays in his room and sees nobody. He won't want to see you, so you must stay out of his way and do what you're told." Mary stared out of the train window at the grey sky and the rain. She was not looking forward to life at her uncle's house. The train journey lasted all day, and it was dark when they arrived at the station. Then there was a long drive to get to the house. It was a cold, windy night, and it was raining heavily. After a while, Mary began to hear a strange, wild noise. She looked out of the window, but could see nothing except the darkness. "What's that noise?" she asked Mrs. Medlock. It's not the sea, is it? No, that's the moor. It's the sound the wind makes, blowing across the moor. What is a moor? It's just miles and miles of wild land, with no trees or houses. Your uncle's house is right on the edge of the moor. Mary listened to the strange, frightening sound. I don't like it, she thought. I don't like it. She looked more disagreeable than ever. Chapter 2. Mary in Yorkshire. They arrived at a very large old house. It looked dark and unfriendly from the outside. Inside, Mary looked around the big shadowy hall and felt very small and lost. They went straight upstairs. Mary was shown to a room where there was a warm fire and food on the table. "This is your room," said Mrs. Medlock. "Go to bed when you've had some supper. And remember, you must stay in your room. Mr. Craven doesn't want you to wander all over the house." When Mary woke up the next morning, she saw a young servant girl cleaning the fireplace. The room seemed dark and rather strange, with pictures of dogs and horses and ladies on the walls. It was not a child's room at all. From the window, she could not see any trees or houses, only wild land, which looked like a kind of purple sea. "Who are you?" she asked the servant coldly. "Martha, miss," answered the girl with a smile. "And what's that outside?" Mary continued. "That's the moor," smiled Martha. "Do you like it?" "No," replied Mary immediately. "I hate it." "That's because you don't know it. You will like it. I love it. It's lovely in spring and summer when there are flowers. It always smells so sweet. The air's so fresh and the birds sing so beautifully. I never want to leave the moor." Mary was feeling very bad-tempered. "You're a strange servant," she said. "In India, we don't have conversations with servants. We give orders, and they obey, and that's that." Martha did not seem to mind Mary's crossness. "I know, I talk too much," she laughed. "Are you going to be my servant?" asked Mary. "Well, not really," were for Mrs. Medlock. I'm going to clean your room and bring you your food. But you won't need a servant except for those things. But who's going to dress me? Martha stopped cleaning and stared at Mary. "The cannot dress this son?" she asked, shocked. "What do you mean? I don't understand your language." "Oh, I forgot. We all speak the Yorkshire dialect here. But of course, you don't understand that. I meant to say, can't you put on your own clothes?" "Of course not. My servant always used to dress me." "Well, I think you should learn to dress yourself. My mother always says people should be able to take care of themselves, even if they're rich and important." Little Miss Mary was furious with Martha. "It's different in India, where I come from. You don't know anything about India, or about servants, or about anything. You... She could not explain what she meant. Suddenly, she felt very confused and lonely. She threw herself down on the bed and started crying wildly. Now, don't cry like that," Martha said gently. "I'm very sorry. You're right. I don't know anything about anything. Please stop crying, miss." She sounded kind and friendly, and Mary began to feel better and soon stopped crying. Martha went on talking as she finished her cleaning. But Mary looked out of the window in a bored way and pretended not to listen. "I've got 11 brothers and sisters, you know, miss. There's not much money in our house, and they all eat so much food. Mother says it's the good fresh air on the moor that makes them so hungry. My brother Dickon, he's always out on the moor. He's 12, and he's got a horse, which he rides sometimes." "Where did he get it?" asked Mary. She had always wanted an animal of her own, and so she began to feel a little interest in Dickon. "Oh, it's a wild horse. But he's a kind boy, and animals like him, you see. Now, you must have your breakfast, miss. Here it is, on the table." "I don't want it," said Mary. "I'm not hungry." "What?" cried Martha. "My little brothers and sisters would eat all this in 5 minutes." "Why?" asked Mary coldly. "Because they don't get enough to eat. That's why. And they're always hungry." "You're very lucky to have the food, miss." Mary said nothing, but she drank some tea and ate a little bread. "Now, put a coat on and run outside to play," said Martha. "It'll do you good to be in the fresh air." Mary looked out of the window at the cold grey sky. "Why should I go out on a day like this?" she asked. "Well, there's nothing to play with indoors, is there?" Mary realized Martha was right. "But "Who will go with me?" she said. Martha stared at her. "Nobody. You'll have to learn to play by yourself. Dickon plays by himself on the moors for hours, with the wild birds and the sheep and the other animals." She looked away for a moment. "Perhaps I shouldn't tell you this, but one of the walled gardens is locked up. Nobody's been in it for 10 years. It was Mrs. Craven's garden, and when she died so suddenly, Mr. Craven locked it and buried the key. Oh, I must go. I can hear Mrs. Medlock's bell ringing for me." Mary went downstairs and wandered through the great empty gardens. Many of the fruit and vegetable gardens had walls round them, but there were no locked doors. She saw an old man digging in one of the vegetable gardens, but he looked cross and unfriendly, so she walked on. "How ugly it all looks in winter," she thought. "But what a mystery the locked garden is. Why did my uncle bury the key? If he loved his wife, why did he hate our garden? Perhaps I'll never know. I don't suppose I'll like him if I ever meet him, and he won't like me, so I won't be able to ask him." Just then, she noticed a robin singing to her from a tree on the other side of a wall. "I think that tree's in the secret garden," she told herself. "There's an extra wall here, and there's no way in." She went back to where the gardener was digging and spoke to him. At first, he answered in a very bad-tempered way. But suddenly, the robin flew down near them, and the old man began to smile. He looked a different person then, and Mary thought how much nicer people looked when they smiled. The gardener spoke gently to the robin, and the pretty little bird hopped on the ground near them. "He's my friend, he is," said the old man. "There aren't any other robins in the garden, so he's a bit lonely." He spoke in strong Yorkshire dialect, so Mary had to listen carefully to understand him. She looked very hard at the robin. "I'm lonely too," she said. She had not realized this before. "What's your name?" she asked the gardener. "Ben Weatherstaff. I'm lonely myself. The robin's my only friend, you see." "I haven't got any friends at all," said Mary. Yorkshire people always say what they are thinking, and old Ben was a Yorkshire moorman. "We're alike, you and me," he told Mary. "We're not pretty to look at, and we're both very disagreeable." Nobody had ever said this to Mary before. "Am I really as ugly and disagreeable as Ben?" she wondered. Suddenly, the robin flew to a tree near Mary and started singing to her. Ben laughed loudly. "Well," he said, "he wants to be your friend. she whispered to the robin. She spoke in a soft, quiet voice, and old Ben looked at her in surprise. "You said that really nicely," he said. "You sound like Dickon when he talks to animals on the moor." "Do you know Dickon?" asked Mary. But just then, the robin flew away. "Oh, look! He's flown into the garden with no door. Please, Ben, how can I get into it?" Ben stopped smiling and picked up his spade. "You can't, and that's that. It's not your business. Nobody can find the door. Run away and play, will you? I must get on with my work." And he walked away. He did not even say goodbye. In the next few days, Mary spent almost all her time in the gardens. The fresh air from the moor made her hungry, and she was becoming stronger and healthier. One day, she noticed the robin again. He was on top of a wall, singing to her. "Good morning. Isn't this fun? Come this way," he seemed to say as he hopped along the wall. Mary began to laugh as she danced along beside him. "I know the secret garden's on the other side of this wall," she thought excitedly. "And the robin lives there. But where's the door?" That evening, she asked Martha to stay and talk to her beside the fire after supper. They could hear the wind blowing round the old house, but the room was warm and comfortable. Mary only had one idea in her head. "Tell me about the secret garden," she said. "Well, all right then, miss. But we aren't supposed to talk about it, you know. It was Mrs. Craven's favourite garden, and she and Mr. Craven used to take care of it themselves. They spent hours there, reading and talking. Very happy they were. They used the branch of an old tree as a seat. But one day, when she was sitting on the branch, it broke, and she fell. She was very badly hurt, and the next day, she died. That's why he hates the garden so much, and won't let anyone go in there." "How sad," said Mary. "Poor Mr. Craven." It was the first time that she had ever felt sorry for anyone. Just then, as she was listening to the wind outside, she heard another noise in the house. "Can you hear a child crying?" she asked Martha. Martha looked confused. No," she replied. "No, I think it must be the wind." But at that moment, the wind blew open their door, and they heard the crying very clearly. "I told you!" cried Mary. At once, Martha shut the door. "It was the wind," she repeated. But she did not speak in her usual natural way, and Mary did not believe her. The next day it was very rainy, so Mary did not go out. Instead, she decided to wander round the house. looking into some of the 100 rooms that Mrs. Medlock had told her about. She spent all morning going in and out of dark, silent rooms, which were full of heavy furniture and old pictures. She saw no servants at all, and was on her way back to her room for lunch when she heard a cry. "It's a bit like the cry that I heard last night," she thought. Just then, the housekeeper, Mrs. Medlock, appeared, with her keys in her hand. "What are you doing here?" she asked crossly. "I didn't know which way to go, and I heard someone crying," answered Mary. "You didn't hear anything. Go back to your room now, and if you don't stay there, I'll lock you in." Mary hated Mrs. Medlock for this. "There was someone crying. I know there was," she said to herself. "But I'll discover who it is soon." She was almost beginning to enjoy herself in Yorkshire. Chapter 3. Finding the Secret Garden. When Mary woke up 2 days later, the wind and rain had all disappeared, and the sky was a beautiful blue. "Spring'll be here soon," said Martha happily. "You'll love the moor then, when it's full of flowers and birds." "Could I get to the moor?" asked Mary. "You've never done much walking, have you? I don't think you could walk the 5 miles to our cottage." "But I'd like to meet your family," Mary said. Martha looked at the little girl for a moment. She remembered how disagreeable Mary had been when she first arrived. But now, Mary looked interested and friendly. "I'll ask Mother," said Martha. "She can always think of a good plan. She's sensible and hard-working and kind. I know you'll like her. I like Dickon, although I've never seen him. I wonder what Dickon will think of you." "He won't like me," said Mary. "No one does." "But do you like yourself? That's what Mother would ask." "No, not really. I've never thought of that." "Well, I must go now. It's my day off, so I'm going home to help Mother with the housework. Goodbye, miss. See you tomorrow." Mary felt lonelier than ever when Martha had gone, so she went outside. The sunshine made the gardens look different, and the change in the weather had even made Ben Weatherstaff easier to talk to. "Can you smell spring in the air?" he asked her. "Things are growing deep down in the ground. Soon you'll see little green shoots coming up. Young plants they are. You watch them." "I will," replied Mary. "Oh, there's the robin." The little bird hopped onto Ben's spade. "Are things growing in the garden where he lives." "What garden?" said Ben in his bad-tempered voice. "You know, the secret garden. Are the flowers dead there?" She really wanted to know the answer. "Ask the robin," said Ben crossly. "He's the only one who's been in there for the last 10 years. 10 years was a long time, Mary thought. She had been born 10 years ago. She walked away, thinking. She had begun to like the gardens, and the robin, and Martha, and Dickon, and their mother. Before she came to Yorkshire, she had not liked anybody. She was walking beside the long wall of the secret garden when a most wonderful thing happened. She suddenly realized the robin was following her. She felt very pleased and excited by this, and cried out, "You like me, don't you? And I like you too." As he hopped along beside her, she hopped and sang too, to show him that she was his friend. Just then, he stopped at a place where a dog had dug a hole in the ground. As Mary looked at the hole, she noticed something almost buried there. She put her hand in and pulled it out. It was an old key. "Perhaps it's been buried for 10 years, she whispered to herself. "Perhaps it's the key to the secret garden." She looked at it for a long time. How lovely it would be to find the garden and see what had happened to it in the last 10 years. She could play in it all by herself, and nobody would know she was there. She put the key safely in her pocket. The next morning, Martha was back at Misselthwaite Manor and told Mary all about her day with her family. "I really enjoyed myself. I helped Mother with the whole week's washing and baking. And I told the children about you. They wanted to know about your servants and the ship that brought you to England and everything. I can tell you some more for next time," offered Mary. "They'd like to hear about riding on elephants and camels, wouldn't they?" "Oh, that would be kind of you, miss. And look, Mother has sent you a present." "A present?" repeated Mary. How could a family of 14 hungry people give anyone a present? "Mother bought it from a man who came to the door to sell things. She told me, 'Martha, you brought me your pay like a good girl, and we need it all. But I'm going to buy something for that lonely child at the manor.' And she bought one, and here it is." It was a skipping rope. Mary stared at it. "What is it?" she asked. "Don't they have skipping ropes in India?" "Well, this is how you use it. Just watch me." Martha took the rope and ran into the middle of the room. She counted up to 100 as she skipped. "That looks lovely," said Mary. "Your mother is very kind. Do you think I could ever skip like that?" "Just try," said Martha. "Mother says it'll make you strong and healthy. Skip outside in the fresh air." Mary put her coat on and took the skipping rope. As she was opening the door, she thought of something and turned round. "Martha, it was your money, really. Thank you." She never thanked people usually, and she did not know how to do it. So she held out her hand, because she knew that adults did that. Martha shook her hand and laughed. "You're a strange child," she said, "like an old woman. Now run away and play." The skipping rope was wonderful. Mary counted and skipped and counted until her face was hot and red. She was having more fun than she had ever had before. She skipped through the gardens until she found Ben Weatherstaff, who was digging and talking to his robin. She wanted them both to see her skip. "Well," said Ben, "you're looking fine and healthy today. Go on skipping. It's good for you." Mary skipped all the way to the secret garden wall. And there was the robin. He had followed her. Mary was very pleased. "You showed me where the key was yesterday," she laughed. "I've got it in my pocket. So you ought to show me the door today." The robin hopped onto an old climbing plant on the wall and sang his most beautiful song. Suddenly, the wind made the plant move, and Mary saw something under the dark green leaves. The thick, heavy plant was covering a door. Mary's heart was beating fast, and her hands were shaking as she pushed the leaves away and found the keyhole. She took the key out of her pocket, and it fitted the hole. Using both hands, she managed to unlock the door. Then she turned round to see if anyone was watching. But there was no one. So she pushed the door, which opened slowly for the first time in 10 years. She walked quickly in and shut the door behind her. At last, she was inside the secret garden. It was the loveliest, most exciting place she had ever seen. There were old rose trees everywhere, and the walls were covered with climbing roses. She looked carefully at the grey branches. Were the roses still alive? Ben would know. She hoped they weren't all dead. But she was inside the wonderful garden in a world of her own. It seemed very strange and silent, but she did not feel lonely at all. Then she noticed some small green shoots coming up through the grass. So something was growing in the garden, after all. When she found a lot more shoots in different places, she decided they needed more air and light. So she began to pull out the thick grass around them. She worked away, clearing the ground for 2 or 3 hours and had to take her coat off because she got so hot. The robin hopped around, pleased to see someone gardening. She almost forgot about lunch. And when she arrived back in her room, she was very hungry and ate twice as much as usual. "Martha," she said as she was eating, "I've been thinking. This is a big, lonely house, and there isn't much for me to do. Do you think if I buy a little spade, I can make my own garden?" "That's just what Mother said," replied Martha. "You'd enjoy digging and watching plants growing. Dickon can get you a spade and some seeds to plant, if you like." "Oh, thank you, Martha. I've got some money that Mrs. Medlock gave me. Will you write and ask Dickon to buy them for me?" "I will, and he'll bring them to you himself." "Oh, then I'll see him." Mary looked very excited. Then she remembered something. "I heard that cry in the house again, Martha. It wasn't the wind this time. I've heard it 3 times now. Who is it?" Martha looked uncomfortable. "You mustn't go wandering around the house, you know. Mr. Craven wouldn't like it. Now, I must go and help the others downstairs. I'll see you at tea time." As the door closed behind Martha, Mary thought to herself, "This really is the strangest house that anyone ever lived in." Chapter 4. Meeting Dickon. Mary spent nearly a week working in the secret garden. Each day she found new shoots coming out of the ground. Soon there would be flowers everywhere, thousands of them. It was an exciting game to her. When she was inside those beautiful old walls, no one knew where she was. During that week, she became more friendly with Ben, who was often digging in one of the vegetable gardens. "What are your favourite flowers, Ben?" she asked him one day. "Roses. I used to work for a young lady who loved roses, you see, and she had a lot in her garden. That was 10 years ago, but she died. Very sad it was." "What happened to the roses?" asked Mary. "They were left there, in the garden." "If rose branches look dry and grey, are they still alive?" asked Mary. It was so important to know. "In the spring, they'll show green shoots, and then—" "But why are you so interested in roses?" he asked. Mary's face went red. "I just wanted to pretend I've got a garden. I haven't got anyone to play with." "Well, that's true," said Ben. He seemed to feel sorry for her. Mary decided She liked old Ben, although he was sometimes bad-tempered. She skipped along and into the wood at the end of the gardens. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise, and there, in front of her, was a boy. He was sitting under a tree, playing on a wooden pipe. He was about 12, with a healthy red face and bright blue eyes. There was a squirrel and a crow in the tree, and 2 rabbits sitting on the grass near him. "They're listening to the music," thought Mary. "I mustn't frighten them." She stood very still. The boy stopped playing. "That's right," he said. "Animals don't like it if you move suddenly. I'm Dickon, and you must be Miss Mary. I've brought you the spade and the seeds." He spoke in an easy, friendly way. Mary liked him at once. As they were looking at the seed packets together, the robin hopped onto a branch near them. Dickon listened carefully to the robin's song. "He's saying he's your friend," he told Mary. "Really? Oh, I am pleased he likes me. Can you understand everything that birds say?" "I think I do, and they think I do. I've lived on the moor with them for so long. Sometimes I think I am a bird or an animal, not a boy at all." His smile was the widest she had ever seen. He explained how to plant the seeds. Suddenly, he said, "I can help you plant them. Where's your garden?" Mary went red, then white. She had never thought of this. What was she going to say? "Could you keep a secret? It's a great secret. If anyone discovers it, I'll die." "I keep secrets for all the wild birds and animals on the moor, so I can keep yours too," he replied. "I've stolen a garden," she said very fast. "Nobody goes into it. Nobody wants it. I love it, and nobody takes care of it. They're letting it die." And she threw her arms over her face and started crying. "Don't cry," said Dickon gently. "Where is it?" "Come with me, and I'll show you," said Miss Mary. They went to the secret garden and entered it together. Dickon walked round, looking at everything. "Martha told me about this place, but I never thought I'd see it," he said. "It's wonderful." "What about the roses?" asked Mary worriedly. "Are they still alive? What do you think?" "Look at these shoots on the branches. Most of them are